Washington claims are efforts to fight terrorism. Seoul's Finance Ministry unveiled minor revisions in its latest assessment report. The core message remains economic recovery is still ongoing. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, coming to you live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome, I'm Daniel Choi. Once it was announced the Washington-Pyongyang summit will be held on June 12th in Singapore, South Korea responded by wishing for the event's success. Plus, Seoul's top office did not rule out the possibility of a three-way summit. Our chief Cheongwon correspondent Moon Gun-young has our top story.
South Korea's presidential Blue House immediately welcomed the announcement of a historic first-ever summit between a sitting U.S. president and leader of North Korea on June 12th in Singapore.
We hope the meeting between the two leaders would lead to the dismantlement of the last remnants of the Cold War. The dismantlement of the division structure, we anticipate the gate to peace and prosperity to open widely on the Korean peninsula. We hope for your success.
But the South Korean president had already been given heads up on the summit location and a rough date at least a week in advance. A Blue House official involved in the process told Arirang TV that it was President Moon's national security advisor, Chung Eui-yong, who first learned of the information on the North Korea-U.S. summit when he visited Washington to meet his counterpart John Bolton last week. As for the hotly debated location of the landmark summit, the official did acknowledge that Seoul has suggested the border truce village of Panmunjom as a possible venue, and up until U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang earlier this week, both Koreas had been pressing for talks at the DMZ and were encouraged by Trump's public endorsement of holding them there. Now, when asked by reporters whether President Moon has stressed the importance of a three-way summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, U.S. President Donald Trump, and himself during his phone conversation with Mr. Trump, the Blue House official gave an answer in the affirmative but said it was inappropriate for him to share Mr. Trump's response, only saying the U.S. leader did show interest in the trilateral summit. But the focus now should be on the North Korea-U.S. summit, and all else will depend on the outcome of that summit.
So basically, no option has been ruled out, as clearly evidenced by the latest series of diplomatic events involving the Korean peninsula. Things that have been never imaginable are developing before our very own eyes, which is the very reason why many here at South Korea's top office say all the more rise on the South Korea-U.S. summit slated for the 22nd of this month, where various issues will be discussed, including a four-party declaration of formally ending the Korean War. Now, the four being the two Koreas, the U.S. and China. Moon Gun-young, Arirang News, the Blue House.
The big question now is this: can the two sides reach a deal in Singapore that leads to Pyongyang's complete denuclearization? More importantly, will the outspoken, larger-than-life leaders get along and make the most out of this rare meeting? Lee Ji-won help us gauge how things could unfold when they sit down for talks.
Two very different yet similar leaders of decades-long adversaries are set to have their historic first meeting next month. Just by looking at their age, the two leaders are a generation apart, with U.S. President Donald Trump more than twice the age of Kim Jong-un. The two also rose to power in contrasting ways. While Trump is a businessman turned politician who climbed his way up to the nation's top seat, Kim was born into the regime's ruling family, who have been passing down the crown for 3 generations. But the two also share similar backgrounds, like being born into rich families and having international levels of education. Whether there's a spark between the two leaders could be crucial in the upcoming North Korea-U.S. summit, as Trump has emphasized the chemistry between him and his counterparts when meeting other world leaders. But the two leaders share two major characteristics: unpredictability and boldness in making game-changing bets. After bravely jumping into the world of politics and winning his presidency, Trump has made a series of radical gambits. Kim, too, has been making such series of bold moves, especially in opening up his regime after his New Year's address. It is this unpredictability and boldness that enabled the Pyongyang-Washington summit, as it was unimaginable just a few months ago, with the two leaders having exchanged harsh rhetoric last year. It is also because of the two leaders' bold, decisive traits that many experts have speculated a complete denuclearization deal could be made during their meeting. And when asked whether the unpredictability of the leaders could possibly impact the meeting in a negative way, some experts say it's highly unlikely.
Kim has become much more predictable in the past few months. There were no major turnovers in recent North Korea-related events, and as for Trump, he believes his sanctions and pressure campaign were effective in finally bringing Pyongyang to the table. So with the two leaders determined to make these talks a success, I am quite optimistic.
But considering how some of the past denuclearization deals, including the joint statement in 2005, were also big but eventually unsuccessful in denuclearizing Pyongyang, the expert added it's not just about signing the deal, but also implementing it. 이지원, Arirang News.
From Switzerland to the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom, there were numerous nominees. But in the end, it was the tiny but mighty island city that was chosen as the backdrop for the upcoming summit. Woo Jung-hee outlined some of the reasons that make Singapore an ideal venue for the historic event.
Out of several candidate locations, it's finally down to one, Singapore. What makes Singapore a favorable location for both Pyongyang and Washington is that the Southeast Asian country is diplomatically neutral. It has good relations with North Korea and the U.S., and both countries have embassies there. Before international sanctions took full effect early last year, Singapore had been at the center of North Korea's overseas economic activities. But at the same time, it's also home to a U.S. naval base where American ships and aircraft make regular visits, and several are stationed. Singapore is also close enough to North Korea for the regime's planes to make a non-stop flight. And the country is well practiced in hosting international events, with the Asia Security Summit, Shangri-La Dialogue, taking place every year. The U.S. actually preferred Singapore more than North Korea did due to Singapore's security and infrastructure, as well as the political burden that would follow if the summit were held at Panmunjom or Pyongyang. And as North Korea has close relations with Singapore, it seems that Pyongyang chose not to drag on a tug-of-war over the summit location, but jump into the real business of the talks.
Basically, it's difficult for North Korea to grant a so-called big present to the U.S., which would be complete denuclearization. And in that sense, there's no reason for President Trump to set his foot in Pyongyang. Third countries would have been considered, but China, Russia, and Mongolia, which are geographically close to North Korea, aren't much of a favorable choice for the U.S.
Singapore's foreign ministry welcomed the decision, saying the country is pleased to host the summit talks between President Trump and North Korea's Kim. It added the country hopes the summit serves to, quote, advance prospects for peace on the Korean peninsula. Woo Jung-hee, Arirang News.
We're keeping our sights fixed on Singapore for now. Other than factors like distance and diplomatic neutrality, experience is something the island has plenty of. The Lion City is no novice when it comes to international summits. For a look back at the long list of events it successfully hosted, we turn to our Cha Sang-mi.
The special moment for world peace is expected to take place next month in Singapore between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. And this is not the first time a historic international summit has been held in this affluent island nation in Southeast Asia. The first ever meeting between the leaders of China and Taiwan took place in Singapore in November 2015 between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Taiwanese counterpart Ma Ying-jeou. And last year, Joseph Yoon, U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Policy, also traveled to Singapore for the Northeast Asia Cooperation Dialogue, a security meeting aimed at the denuclearization of North Korea. As for why Singapore has been preferred as an international summit venue, experts say that the country has garnered trust around the world for its political and diplomatic neutrality.
The Singaporean government, policy-wise, offers a very neutral background to these kinds of proceedings. For instance, Singapore doesn't have any particular regional agenda beyond Southeast Asia.
Apart from its convenience and accessibility, the neutrality Singapore offers is what makes the country so attractive for both Pyongyang and Washington.
The Singaporean government doesn't really have a particular agenda when it comes to North Korea's denuclearization, unlike South Korea.
North Korea also has an embassy in Singapore's business district, making the country a more accessible choice for Pyongyang. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
The star-studded South Korean team that performed in Pyongyang, as well as artists who put on a show during the welcoming banquet at the Inter-Korean Summit, were all invited to the nation's top office. During a luncheon, President Moon pledged to seek more cultural exchanges between the two Koreas. Hwang Oh-jun shares with us his remarks.
Jo Young-pil, Red Velvet, Baek Ji-young, and Seoyeon, to name a few. The first couple of South Korea invited the nation's K-pop stars to the presidential office of Cheongwade for lunch. These are the artists who performed in Pyongyang in early April in reciprocation for a visit by North Korean performers during the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. The Pyongyang concert was attended by thousands of North Koreans, including Kim Jong-un himself. Also invited to the special lunch were the musicians who performed at the recent Inter-Korean Summit in the border village of Panmunjom during the welcoming banquet and the farewell ceremony. The lunch was held to thank them for their successful performances and for helping improve relations between the two Koreas.
오늘 이 자리는 여러분들께서 우리나라를 위해서 아주 중요한 역할을 해주셨기 때문에 나라가 여러분들께 그 감사로 점심을 한턱 쏘는 것으로 그렇게 받아들여 주시기 바랍니다.
South Korea's Culture Minister Do Jong-hwan also attended the lunch. According to the president, the recent cultural exchanges with North Korea not only moved the hearts of the North Korean spectators, but also those of the skeptics here in the South. He said when South Koreans watched North Koreans singing along and applauding to South Korean songs during the Pyongyang concert, it kindled a sense that the two Koreas are indeed one.
이렇게 우리 남북 예술단으로 시작된 교류가 이렇게 이제 계속 흘러간다면, 그렇게 해서 또 남과 북이 더 많이 만나게 된다면 결국에는 남과 북이 자유롭게 오가기도 하고 종래에는 남과 북이 다시 하나가 되는 때가 오리라고 생각합니다.
With thoughts of reconciliation and reunification in the air, President Moon pledged that he and his administration will do their best to continue the momentum of exchanges between the two Koreas in culture, arts, and sports. Hwang Oh-jun, Arirang News.
A recent report estimated that the potential cost of Korean unification could be around $2 trillion over 10 years. Britain-based SLJ Asset Mgt attempted to calculate the sum based on the cost of Germany's unification. The report says financial transfers from West Germany to the East in 1989 work out at around $2 trillion in today's money, over 60% of that of the West's current GDP. The paper noted that the economic gap between the two Koreas is much larger than the two Germanys before unification. It also suggested Seoul, Washington, Beijing, and Tokyo splitting the cost evenly at about $500 billion over a decade per country. North Korea is beginning to demolish its Punggye-ri nuclear test site. According to Washington Post, a steady reduction in the number of buildings in the area could be seen over the past 2 weeks. Commercial satellite images show 5 or 6 buildings have come down. These were relatively small structures near the north and south portals and the entrances to the main tunnels. An expert in non-proliferation studies told the Post this could be part of Kim Jong-un's move to dismantle the test site by May, which is a pledge the young leader made during the historic Inter-Korean Summit last month. Washington is imposing more sanctions on Iran. They mainly target a currency network accused of financing a special force designated as a sponsor of terrorism. Park Hee-jun zooms in on the rapid measures that come just days after America confirmed its withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal.
The United States has imposed its first sanctions on 9 Iranian individuals and entities, just days after President Trump's announcement to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. The U.S. Treasury Department announced Thursday that it took joint action with the United Arab Emirates against 6 individuals and 3 companies to disrupt an extensive currency exchange network that has funneled millions of U.S. dollars to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's elite Quds Force, a group designated by Washington as a supporter of terrorism since 2007. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin gave a statement accusing the Iranian regime and its central bank of helping the group access U.S. dollars to use for malign activities such as funding and arming its regional proxy groups. He called for the international community's joint efforts to combat Iran's efforts to fund what he called the world's largest state sponsor of terror. The UAE government has also announced that it will impose sanctions against 9 Iranian individuals and entities. It did not specify the targets, but American media have reported that they are likely to be the same entities that the U.S. has targeted. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
The government had a positive outlook for the Korean economy in its May forecast. Still on a recovery path is what's listed on its latest Green Book. Kim Mo-gyun fills us in on the revised assessment.
The Korean economy is still on a recovery path, despite the drop in the production and investment sectors. That's according to the monthly Green Book released by the Ministry of Strategy and Finance on Friday. In the report, the ministry said industrial output and investment saw a correction in the first 2 months of the year due to a base effect, while domestic consumption shows continued growth. The May edition of the report was revised on Friday after the first version of the report had caused some confusion over whether the government had changed its positive outlook for the economy. But in the revised version, the ministry confirmed that the nation's economic recovery is still continuing. Korea's overall industrial output fell for the second consecutive month, dropping by 1.2% on month in March. Production in the mining and manufacturing sectors dropped 2.5% on month, mainly due to sluggish automobile and machinery production. Korea's exports also dropped 1.5% on year for the month of April. Prospects in the consumption were a bit brighter. Retail sales were up 2.7% on month in March, and consumer prices also rose 1.5% on year in April. Regarding the latest report, an economic expert says that it is still early to determine whether the economy is on a recovery path, but added that the economic growth for this year would not be as bright as last year's.
Though the government forecast suggests the economy is recovering, I think that this year's growth will not be as good as last year's. With the current export situation and U.S. President Trump announcing his tightened trade measures, I think it's difficult to expect a fast growth rate for this year.
Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
The Trade Ministry is joining forces with some of Korea's biggest businesses to ensure the country does not trail behind in this rapidly changing world. Tens of billions of dollars will be injected into next-gen tech initiatives to ensure Seoul stays ahead of the curve. Kim Hye-sung gets us better acquainted with the Industry Innovation 2020 platform.
The Korean government will work with local companies to sharpen the country's edge in future industries. Seoul's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced its new industry development plan on Friday with businesses in the private sector. Dubbed the Industry Innovation 2020 platform, Korean businesses will invest up to $150 billion over the next 5 years in new industries like driverless cars, renewable energy, and the Internet of Things. The ministry said it expects the massive cash injection to create around 200,000 new jobs by 2022 and about 27,000 jobs this year alone. It'll support the plan by nurturing talent and easing regulations to allow businesses to test their products and services. The goal is to create more innovative products and enhance competitiveness in 5 major industries, including electric and driverless cars, IoT-based home appliances, semiconductors and displays, renewable energy, and biotech. The ministry said it'll increase the percentage of R&D investment on these industries from the current 30% to 50% by 2022 and improve Korea's intellectual property-related laws. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
With Parliament stuck in gridlock for over a month now and getting no work done, its speaker may involve his right to convene a plenary session next week. Today, Chung Se-gyun made a request to the Assembly Steering Committee for its cooperation in opening a full session at the start of next week to process the resignations of lawmakers that are running for the local elections in June. Monday is the deadline for the resignation to be accepted in order to hold by-elections next month in the vacant districts. The National Assembly law stipulates that the Speaker consults with the House Steering Committee to hold the plenary session, but even if they disagree, he has the right to go ahead. However, there's wide speculation that Chung may wait for the parties to reach a last-minute deal to normalize Parliament by Monday, something that could happen, especially since now the ruling party has a new floor leader. The Speaker might face a bigger fight from the main opposition Liberty Korea if he uses his prerogative. Regulations on euthanasia differ from country to country. Over in Australia, assisted suicide is illegal, which is why one centenarian left home and traveled to Switzerland to undergo that process. Kan Young-woo explains how his action may bring greater attention to the necessity of this option.
What are we waiting for? That's what 104-year-old Australian scientist David Goodall said before he ended his life on Thursday local time at the Life Circle Clinic in Switzerland. Goodall had to fly from Australia to Switzerland for his assisted suicide, as such an act is illegal in Australia. Living longer than a century, Goodall, who was not terminally ill, said his deteriorating quality of life led him to make the decision.
My life has been rather poor for the past year or so, and I'm very happy to end it, yes.
To pay for Goodall's journey and expenses, euthanasia advocacy group Exit International raised almost $15,000.
He successfully ended his life and ended his long journey today with an infusion of Nembutal, and he died at 12:30.
Goodall hoped that his case would draw attention to the need for a worldwide debate on the possibility of euthanasia for elderly people. Kan Young-woo, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, the weather has been great the past couple of days, but it looks like we are going to stay indoors for the weekend.
Daniel, the weather is once again fluctuating from nice to inconvenient. Yes, we did have relatively great weather for the whole week, and just when we thought we could plan a picnic outside, rain makes its entrance. And on top of the weekend precipitation, the mercury will drop, while the southern regions and Jeju Island will see strong winds and lightning along with the rain. The cold front is expected to move in from the west side of the peninsula, so after midnight it will start raining on the west coast with clouds eventually spreading nationwide by Saturday afternoon. And the rain will fall the heaviest over in the south, while Seoul and the eastern regions will receive between 5 and 40 millimeters of rain. Now the country will start the morning in between the mid to high teens. The Seoul will start off at 13 degrees Celsius and Jeju at 18 degrees. Into the afternoon, Seoul will peak up to 17 degrees, while Daegu, Gyeongju, and Busan tops out to 20, 21, and 19 degrees respectively. Now by Sunday afternoon, the sky should be clear and cooler temperatures are expected, but it will rise back up. In fact, starting next week, you'll be getting a taste of summer with highs waving into the high 20s. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you in tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for watching. Here's wishing you an incredible weekend.